The billionaire, who got more than he bargained for what happens when a man who has it all decides he wants more. Ricardo Vargas, a billionaire industry titan, entered his divorce hearing with a predator's smile. On his arm was not his wife of 15 years, the mother of his children, but his stunning young mistress, Julieta. He thought he had the perfect plan to leave his wife, Amelia, with nothing, not even her dignity. He was about to publicly accuse her of infidelity and demand a paternity test for their 2 children. But in the cold, silent halls of justice, a secret waited, a secret locked in an envelope on the judge's desk. Ricardo came expecting a victory, but he was walking into a perfectly laid trap, and the truth encoded in DNA was about to detonate his entire world. The price of arrogance. Damian Cross, a real estate magnate forged in ice, shattered his perfect life and his wife's heart for a younger, dazzling mistress. He thought he had won. He thought he was in control. But he was about to learn a devastating truth. The only thing more dangerous than a woman scorned is a woman who finds her strength. When Eleanor not only survives, but begins to build a new life with his greatest rival, Damian's cold facade cracks, unleashing an obsession that will destroy everything he has left. This is a story of ultimate betrayal, a woman's incredible fight for redemption, and the explosive consequences of a powerful man realizing he lost everything. The silence in his luxury penthouse on New York's Park Avenue was a living entity. It breathed the sterile air, circulated by a system Eleanor had once admired and now found suffocating. She clung to the vast glass panels overlooking the sprawling green carpet of Central Park, which seemed 1,000,000 miles away. For 3 weeks, this silence had been her main companion, a more constant presence than her husband, Damian Cross. At 34, Damian was an industry titan, a man who didn't just enter rooms, he conquered them. His face, a collection of sharp, attractive angles, was a mask of cold calculation that had graced the covers of business magazines. He moved with the predatory grace of a man who had never been told no. When his intense cobalt blue eyes first landed on Eleanor Vance, a quiet art historian with a love for dusty books and impressionist light, she felt like the most seen woman in the world. He had pursued her with a singular focus that she mistook for devotion. It was only after the wedding, after her signature was on the prenuptial agreement his lawyers had called a formality, that she realized it wasn't devotion. It was acquisition. Now, at 28, Eleanor was 3 months pregnant with their first child, a fact that had prompted a flash of something unreadable in Damian's eyes before the mask returned. She had hoped this would bridge the chasm that had been opening between them, a silent, growing abyss filled with nights he justified as board meetings, and a coldness in their bed that had nothing to do with the thermostat. He walked into the living room. His custom-made Italian shoes made no sound on the polished marble floor. He had already showered and changed his work armor for a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than her first car. He didn't look at her, but went to the floor-to-ceiling wine fridge. "We need to talk, Eleanor." His voice was calm, measured, the voice he used when closing a hostile acquisition. Eleanor's hand instinctively went to her stomach, still flat. A knot of ice formed in her chest. "I tried to talk to you last night, Damian. You came in after I had fallen asleep. I was busy." He selected a bottle of sparkling water, twisting the cap with a sharp snap that made her flinch. He still hadn't turned to face her. "This isn't working." The 4 words floated in the air, brutally simple. Eleanor's heart beat against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. "What? What isn't working? The schedule? I can have dinner ready later. I just thought, He finally turned, his eyes fixed on hers. There was no anger, no sadness, just a deep, terrifying emptiness. This marriage has reached its end. The breath left her body in a painful gasp. What are you talking about? Damien, I'm pregnant. Her voice was a whisper, a desperate plea for him to remember, to care. I'm aware, he said, taking a sip of water. Arrangements will be made. The child will be well cared for, obviously. You will be too. I'm not a monster. The distant cruelty of his words was more painful than any shouting match. He was divesting, cutting his losses. She was a failed investment. A monster, she repeated, a hysterical laugh bubbling in her throat. You're talking about our baby, our marriage, as if it were a line item on a balance sheet. A flicker of annoyance crossed his features for the first time. There's someone else, isn't there? Her name is Isabelle Dubois, and yes, it's serious. The name hit Eleanor with the force of a physical blow. A 24-year-old Instagram model and socialite she had seen plastered on gossip sites, often at the same charity galas Damien attended alone. Eleanor had told herself it was nothing. Damien had assured her it was nothing. The casual way he said her name now, the possessive finality of "it's serious," told Eleanor it had been everything. So that's it? Eleanor stood up. Her legs were shaking. You bring this girl into our lives and I'm supposed to just disappear, with your child inside me? I would prefer no drama, Damien said, his voice dropping to a warning tone. My lawyers will be in touch tomorrow. They've drafted a generous severance package. Consider it a bonus for your time at the company. He actually used those words. Severance package. The insult was so profound, so dehumanizing, that something snapped inside her. Fear receded, replaced by a surge of white-hot rage. The company? Is that what I was to you, Damien? An employee of Cross Holdings. You were my wife. The position is no longer available. He set the water bottle on the marble counter with a dry click. I've arranged for you to stay at the plaza for a few weeks, until you find a more permanent arrangement. Isabel will be moving in this weekend. It's best if you're gone by tomorrow night. He was evicting her. From her home. From her life. The power imbalance was breathtaking. Absolute. He held all the cards. The money. The lawyers. The house. He had systematically isolated her from her old life, her old friends, until he was the sun around which her world revolved. And now he was extinguishing the light. No, she said, the word sounding strange and powerful on her tongue. Damien raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. No, I won't be discussing my life, or my child's life, with your lawyers. I won't be packed up and shipped off to a hotel like last season's luggage. You want a divorce, Damien? You'll have to go through me, not your legal department. He studied her, a flash of surprise in his cold eyes. He had expected tears, pleas, a swift and tidy collapse. He had not expected defiance. A slow, chilling smile touched his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. Very well, Eleanor, he said softly. But you need to understand something. When I want something, I get it. And when I want something to disappear, it disappears. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving Eleanor alone in the cavernous silence. The icy knot in her chest had spread, chilling her to the bone. He wasn't just leaving her, he was erasing her. And as her hand trembled over the slight curve of her stomach, she knew this wasn't just a divorce. It was a war for her survival, and the survival of the only pure thing she had left. Do you think Eleanor stands a chance against Damien? Leave your opinion in the comments. The rise of a rival the next 24 hours were a blur of calculated cruelty. By morning, Eleanor's access to their joint accounts was frozen. A terse email from Damien's personal assistant informed her that a moving service would arrive at 2 p.m. to pack her personal belongings and transport them to a storage facility. Her penthouse key would be deactivated at 6 p.m. sharp. He was dismantling her life with the efficiency of a corporate restructuring. Her best friend, Clara Higgins, a fiery redhead and struggling stage actress who had never trusted Damien, arrived within the hour, arms full of coffee and righteous fury. "The son of a bitch!" Clara hissed, pacing the enormous walk-in closet as Eleanor pointed indifferently at clothing. "A severance package? Does he think he's God?" "He thinks he's Damien Cross," Eleanor replied, her voice hollow. "To him, it's the same thing." Packing was a surreal experience. This dress bought for a gala where Damien had ignored her all night. Those shoes, a thoughtful gift after he had missed their anniversary. Each object was a ghost, a memory of a love she now realized had been a meticulously crafted illusion. By 5 o'clock, Eleanor stood on Park Avenue with 2 suitcases, her purse, and a check Clara had pressed into her hand. The doorman, who had greeted her with a deferential Mrs. Cross for 3 years, now looked right through her. Her key was just a useless piece of metal. She was officially an exile. Clara took her to her small, cluttered but warm apartment in Greenwich Village. It was a 5th-floor walk-up that smelled of old books and fresh tea, a world away from the sterile, scentless air of the penthouse. For the first week, Eleanor barely left the guest room. She slept. She cried. She stared at the ceiling. The psychological whiplash left her nauseous and dizzy. The morning sickness was a cruel, constant reminder of the baby Damien had referred to as an arrangement. Her first communication from Damien's legal team was a thick, intimidating packet of documents. The terms were brutally clear. In exchange for her signing an unbreakable NDA and agreeing to a quick, uncontested divorce, she would receive a one-time payment. The custody agreement for the unborn child was detailed with chilling precision. Damien would have exclusive legal custody, and Eleanor would be granted supervised visitation rights at his discretion. They were trying to buy her child. "He can't do this!" Clara raged, tossing the papers onto her coffee table. "This is insane! He's trying to bully you into disappearing!" "It's not bullying," Eleanor said, a deadly calm settling over her. "It's strategy." That was the moment the embers of her old self, the sharp, analytical mind of the historian, began to glow. She had spent years studying the strategies of kings and conquerors. Damien was no different. He was using overwhelming force to secure a swift, unconditional surrender, and she wouldn't give it to him. With Clara's help, she found a small, fiercely intelligent family law attorney named Laura Scott. Laura, a woman whose sharp suits and even sharper mind commanded respect, read the proposed settlement. Her expression grew more stormy with each page. "This isn't a settlement, Ms. Vance," Laura said, her voice like steel. "This is a declaration of war. Mr. Cross is accustomed to people folding. We are not going to fold." The first step was survival. Clara's check wouldn't last forever. Eleanor began selling the jewelry Damien had bought her, the consolation prizes, the guilt gifts. Each transaction felt like shedding a layer of fake skin. With the money, she rented a small one-bedroom flat in a modest building in the Lower East Side. It was Spartan, with second-hand furniture and walls that needed paint. But it was hers. On a rainy Tuesday, feeling a desperate need for air, she found herself wandering into the small, independent art galleries that peppered the neighborhood. The quiet reverence of the spaces soothed her frayed nerves. In one gallery, a collection of raw, powerful photographs of urban decay caught her eye. She was so absorbed in one particular piece, a shot of a single resilient blade of grass growing through a crack in a concrete monolith, that she didn't notice the man who had stopped beside her. "It's incredible, isn't it?" a deep voice said. "How life finds a way." Eleanor turned. The man was tall and lean, with dark, thoughtful eyes and a shadow of a beard. He wore a well-cut but understated gray suit. There was a quiet intensity about him that was compelling. "It is," she agreed, turning back to the photo. "It's defiant." "That's the word," he said, smiling. "Most people see decay. You see defiance." He extended a hand. "I'm Julian Rhodes." The name startled her. Julian Rhodes, the CEO of Rhodes Development. He was Damien's most significant and bitter rival. They were polar opposites in the business world. Damien was known for hostile takeovers and ruthless downsizing, while Rhodes was known for sustainable projects and a reputation for integrity. Their feud was financial legend. Damien despised him with a passion that bordered on the pathological. Eleanor's guard went up instantly. "Eleanor Vance," she said, her tone colder than she intended. Julian's eyes widened in recognition. It wasn't her name he recognized, but her face. He had seen it in photos. "Dan!" on Damien Cross's arm. A ghost of a pained expression crossed his face. He knew who she was, and most likely what had happened. The gossip machine of the New York elite was ruthlessly efficient. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice soft with what sounded like genuine sympathy. "For what it's worth, I've seen your work up close. No one deserves that." Eleanor bristled. She didn't want his pity. "I don't know what you're referring to." He didn't press. He simply nodded, his gaze returning to the photograph. "Well, Ms. Vance, it was a pleasure to meet you." He gave her another small, respectful smile and walked away, leaving Eleanor with a strange mix of suspicion and an unbidden flash of warmth. He hadn't been predatory or invasive. He had been kind. Do you think Julian Rhodes has an ulterior motive, or is he truly an unexpected ally? Tell us in the comments. The obsession, meanwhile, Damien was finding that his life with Isabel was not the seamless upgrade he had anticipated. The penthouse, once a silent sanctuary of his control, was now filled with the chaos of Isabel's world. Her vapid, loud friends were a constant presence. The quiet he craved was replaced by the incessant click of her phone camera as she documented every moment of her new, luxurious life for her followers. She was beautiful, she was exciting, and she was utterly infatuated with him. But he found her adoration cloying, her conversation shallow. He had won, but the prize felt empty. He had expected Eleanor to crumble, to take the money and disappear, a footnote in his biography. Instead, his lawyers reported that she had retained counsel. She was fighting back. He would see paparazzi photos of her, looking pale and thin, but undeniably resolute, walking into a lawyer's office. One night, a photo from a society blog popped up on his feed. It was from the gallery opening. A candid shot showed Eleanor, her hand resting on her pregnant belly, talking to Julian Rhodes. They weren't touching. They weren't even particularly close. But they were sharing a space, a moment. A nauseating, unfamiliar emotion twisted in Damien's stomach. It was hot, it was acidic, and it tasted like poison. It was jealousy. It was possession. How dare she? How dare he? She was still Mrs. Damien Cross. She was carrying his child. The sight of her in the same frame as his most hated rival was a personal, intolerable, narcissistic wound. He snatched his phone and called his head of security. "I want to know everything about her new life," he snarled, his voice a low growl. "Where does she go? Who does she see? Everything. And I want leverage on Rhodes. Find it. I don't care what it costs." He had tried to erase her with indifference. Now, he would erase her with his power. The game had changed. This was no longer about a quiet divorce. This was about total and utter destruction. The new life in the Lower East Side was a study in contrasts for Eleanor. the loss of immense wealth was less jarring than the return of autonomy. She learned the rhythms of the subway, the names of the shopkeepers at the local market, the simple joy of buying a coffee without it being charged to a faceless corporate account. It was a smaller life, but it was profoundly and completely her own. The legal battle was a slow, grueling war of attrition. Damien's lawyers sent a flurry of motions, demanded exhaustive financial disclosures from her pre-marriage life, and tried to paint her as an unstable gold digger. Laura Scott was a bulldog, countering every move with meticulous, unyielding professionalism. "He's trying to wear you down emotionally," Laura told her during one grueling strategy session. "Don't let him!" Eleanor's second encounter with Julian Rhodes was as unexpected as the first. She was in a small, independent bookstore, running her hand along the spines of art history texts when he spoke her name. "Eleanor." She turned, startled. He held a biography of architect Frank Gehry. He looked less formal today, in dark jeans and a simple, well-fitting shirt. "Mr. Rhodes?" "Julian, please," he insisted, with a soft smile in his eyes. He gestured with the book. "A fan of Gehry?" "I am," she admitted. "I wrote my master's thesis on his use of light in the Guggenheim." A look of genuine delight spread across his face. "The Guggenheim is a masterpiece. It's practically a religious experience. For the next 20 minutes, they forgot who they were, the scorned wife, the corporate rival, and they became two people with a shared passion for architectural theory." He spoke with a captivating passion and intelligence. He wasn't just a developer building glass towers. He was a man who understood the soul of a building. "Listen," he said, as they stood by the door. "This is going to sound forward, and please, feel free to say no. I'm hosting a small dinner on Friday. Some friends, architects, artists, something low-key. I think you'd find it interesting. No ulterior motives, I promise. Just good conversation." Eleanor hesitated. Every instinct, honed by years of Damien's manipulations, screamed at her to be suspicious. Why was he being so kind? But another, quieter voice, the one that was tired of being afraid, urged her to say yes. She was lonely. She missed being around people who shared her passions. "I'd like that," she said, surprising herself. The dinner was held at his loft in the Soho neighborhood, and stunning space filled with books, art, and warm, reclaimed wood. It was the antithesis of Damien's penthouse, a home, not a showroom. The guests were warm, engaging, and happily oblivious to her connection to Damien Cross. For the first time in months, Eleanor felt like herself again. Not the discarded wife, but Eleanor Vance, the art historian. She and Julian talked for an uninterrupted hour. He told her about his beginnings, how he worked his way up from a small construction firm. His vision was always about creating spaces that served communities, not just clients. And he listened, truly listened, as she spoke of her abandoned career, the passion she still felt for it. "You should be working in the field," he said, his expression serious. "You have a brilliant eye. Have you ever considered art consulting for architectural firms, curating the spaces they build?" "I wouldn't even know where to begin," she confessed. "You begin by building a portfolio," he said simply. "Offer your services pro bono to a small firm on a notable project. Build your name." He paused. "A friend of mine is leading a new community library project in the Brooklyn neighborhood. They have a very tight budget for acquisitions. They could use someone with your expertise to help them source affordable, meaningful pieces from local artists." It wasn't a handout. It was a door, cracked slightly open. It was a sign of respect for her talent, something she hadn't felt in years. Tears pricked her eyes. "Thank you, Julian. That means a lot." Their relationship grew slowly, organically, from that night on. They met for coffee, to discuss the library project. He sent her articles about new exhibitions. She found herself looking forward to his messages, his quiet, steady presence. He never spoke ill of Damien. He never pried into the details of her divorce. His focus was always on her future. The library project became her lifeline. She threw herself into it. Hunting through student exhibitions and small galleries, meeting with hungry young artists. She was good at it. She was negotiating deals, curating a collection, bringing a space to life. She was building something. Just as Damien was trying to tear her down, the slow change in her was palpable. The fear that had been her constant companion began to recede, replaced by a nascent confidence. Her body was changing. The soft swelling of her pregnancy was now a visible, reassuring curve. She was creating life in more ways than one. The tipping point. Damien, accustomed to hourly updates from his security team, watched this evolution with a growing sense of rage. He saw photos of Eleanor, her face animated and happy, leaving the library site in Brooklyn. He saw her sharing a laugh with Julian Rhodes over coffee. The narrative he had constructed in his mind, the pathetic, shattered wife, was being rewritten before his very eyes. And he was not the author. His obsession, once a cold, calculated strategy, was becoming a hot, consuming fire. He saw Julian not just as a business rival, but as a thief, stealing what was rightfully his. Not Eleanor the woman, but the idea of her, the mother of his heir, a cross-possession. To see her thriving without him, and worse, with Rhodes's help, was a personal, intolerable narcissistic wound. He snatched his phone and called his head of security. "I want to know everything about her new life," he snarled, his voice a low growl. "Where does she go? Who does she see? Everything. And I want leverage on Rhodes. Find it. I don't care what it costs." He had tried to erase her with indifference. Now, he would erase her with his power. The game had changed. This was no longer about a quiet divorce. This was about total and utter destruction. Meanwhile, Damien's life with Isabel was rapidly deteriorating. Her constant need for public validation grated on him. He would come home seeking a sanctuary and find her in the middle of a live stream, pouting for her followers. One night she confronted him. Her voice was shrill. "People are talking, Damien. They're posting photos of her with him. It's humiliating. Why haven't you crushed her yet? You promised you'd handle it." "I am handling it," he snapped, the pressure in his skull mounting. "It doesn't look like it," she shrieked. "It looks like she's winning, and you look weak." The word weak hit a raw nerve deep in his soul, the only place where his father's corrosive voice still echoed. He looked at Isabel, at her perfectly constructed face, and for the first time felt nothing but contempt. He had traded a diamond for a piece of glitter, and the glitter was starting to look cheap. He walked out, leaving her to babble into a cloud of expensive perfume. He drove aimlessly through the city, rage and confusion churning inside him. He ended up parked across the street from Eleanor's modest apartment building. The lights were on in her window. He imagined her there, her life continuing, this new person growing within her, a life he had both created and discarded. Then he saw it. Julian Rhodes' car pulled up. He got out, holding a bag that looked like takeout. He rang the bell, was let in, and moments later his silhouette appeared in her window next to hers. Damien's hands clenched the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. It was no longer about strategy. It was no longer about business. It was something primal. He had to break them. He had to prove that he was the architect of their world, and if he couldn't build it, he would burn it to the ground. The motion for an emergency hearing was Damien's full declaration of war. He was no longer trying to control the narrative. He was trying to scorch the earth. The legal filing was a masterpiece of character assassination, filled with half-truths and vicious innuendo. It painted Eleanor as a reckless, emotionally volatile woman, and Julian as a predatory opportunist who was using her to get to Damien. It requested that the court order a psychiatric evaluation for Eleanor and grant Damien exclusive temporary custody of the baby upon its birth. Sitting in Laura Scott's office, Eleanor read the document. Her hands were shaking. The words were a violation, a twisting of her reality into something ugly and unrecognizable. "He's using the baby as a hostage," Eleanor said. Her voice trembled with a fury that burned away her tears. "This isn't about his concern for the child. This is about punishing me for not breaking." "It's a classic scorched earth tactic from a narcissist," Laura said, her face grim. "He can't stand that you're building a new life, particularly with Julian Rhodes. We'll fight this. We'll document everything. Your work on the library project, your stable home, your prenatal appointments. We'll build a fortress of facts to withstand his fiction." The date for the hearing was set. The psychological toll was immense. Eleanor felt as if she were living under a microscope. Every action scrutinized, every choice second-guessed. Sleep offered little escape, her dreams filled with sterile courtrooms, and Damien's cold, triumphant smile. Julian was her rock. When she called, her voice breaking as she told him about the court filing, he was at her flat within the hour. He didn't offer platitudes or false assurances. He sat with her, read the document complete, and his jaw tightened with a quiet, controlled rage. "He won't win this, Eleanor," Julian said, his voice a low, steady anchor in her storm. "My lawyers will coordinate with Laura. We'll provide all documentation to refute these lies. I won't let him do this to you." His steadfastness was a balm to her shattered nerves, but a seed of guilt took root in her heart. "He's doing this because of you, Julian. If I hadn't let you into my life." "No." He cut her off gently but firmly, turning to look at her. His dark eyes were intense, serious. "He's doing this because he's a bully who is terrified of losing control. He would have found another reason, another person to use as a weapon. This is who he is. The only thing that has changed is that you're not facing it alone." In that moment, the unspoken thing between them shifted. The slow burn of friendship, of mutual respect, finally ignited. He reached out a hand, covering hers. It was the first time he had touched her with such deliberate tenderness. The warmth of his skin was a stark contrast to the memory of Damien's icy touch. "I'm falling in love with you, Eleanor," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I know the timing is a disaster. I know your life is a battlefield right now, but I can't pretend it's just friendship anymore." Tears streamed down Eleanor's face, not from sadness, but from a deep, overwhelming relief. It felt like the first breath after being underwater for too long. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," she confessed. Their first kiss wasn't a desperate, passionate affair. It was soft, hesitant, a question and an answer all at once. It was a promise of a future she hadn't dared to imagine. Do you think this new love between Eleanor and Julian can withstand Damien's fury? Share your predictions." The price paid Damien, however, was spiraling. His obsession was consuming his life. He was distracted at work. His Midas touch faltered. He made a reckless, ill-advised bid at a major auction for a new telecom firm, a move driven by ego more than strategy, and lost millions. His board members began to whisper. The infallible Damien Cross seemed volatile. His home life was a wasteland. Isabel, seeing her dreamed-of life and Damien's attention slipping away, grew more desperate. She alternated between screaming accusations and pathetic attempts to rekindle their passion. She would wear lingerie that he had once found exciting, and he would look right through her, his mind miles away, parked on a street in the Lower East Side. "What does she have that I don't?" she shrieked at him one night, after he'd spent an hour staring silently at his phone. A private investigator's photo of Eleanor and Julian leaving a restaurant on the screen. "Nothing," Damien snapped, the lie tasting like ashes in his mouth. But it was a lie. Eleanor had a quiet strength he had mistaken for weakness. She had a resilience he couldn't break. She had a core of integrity that made Isabel's desperate machinations seem vulgar and cheap. Eleanor had been real, and he had discarded her for this performance. Isabel's fear and jealousy turned into something poisonous. She saw Eleanor not just as a rival for Damien's affection, but as the wrecking ball of her carefully constructed future. If Damien's empire crumbled, so would she. She had clawed her way up from an impoverished background she hid from everyone, and she wasn't going back. She decided to take matters into her own hands. She found Eleanor's address. One afternoon, she appeared on the doorstep of the Lower East Side apartment, dressed in a stunningly expensive outfit, her face a mask of false concern. Eleanor opened the door, her heart sinking. "Isabel, what do you want?" "I'm worried about you, Eleanor," Isabel began, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "And I'm worried about Damien. This war between you is destroying him." "This war was declared by him," Eleanor said coldly, not inviting her in. "But you keep fighting," Isabel pressed, her eyes glittering. "You and Julian Rhodes. Do you have any idea what you're doing? You're making Damien look weak, and that is the one thing he can't tolerate. He will ruin you. He will ruin Rhodes. He will burn everything to the ground before he loses." "Is that a threat?" Isabel's facade cracked. A sneer twisted her perfect lips. "It's a fact. You think you're so righteous, don't you? The poor, discarded wife. But you're not as innocent as you look. I know you were putting doubts in his mind about me long before I ever came along. I know you were playing the victim to make him feel guilty." Eleanor looked at her, baffled. "What are you talking about? I never did that." "Oh, please," Isabel sneered. "Don't play dumb. You think you can get him back? He doesn't want you. He's only doing this because his ego is bruised. Just leave him alone. Disappear. Take the money and go. It's what's best for everyone, especially your baby." The confrontation was baffling. Isabel's accusations, nonsensical, but it was also revealing. Isabel wasn't a confident victor. She was terrified. She was standing on a trap door, and she knew it. The exchange, however, had been observed. A man in a car parked across the street had filmed the whole thing on his phone. He was a private investigator, but he wasn't working for Damien. He was working for Julian. After the court filing, Julian had, with great reluctance, hired a discreet firm to follow Isabel, suspecting she was more than a simple passive player in Damien's cruelty. He needed to protect Eleanor from every angle. That night, Julian watched the video. He saw Isabel's desperation. He heard her bizarre, unfounded accusations. Something didn't fit. On a hunch, he had the investigator do a deep dive, not just on Isabel Dubois the model, but on who she was before. What he found was the hidden motive, the secret that powered her entire existence. And it was the key that would unlock the prison Damien had built for himself and cause his carefully constructed world to come crashing down. The final showdown. The day of the custody hearing dawned gray and oppressive. The sky over New York was the color of a bruised slate. The courtroom was a cold, wood-paneled box, designed to intimidate and diminish. Eleanor sat beside Laura Scott, her back straight, her hands tightly clasped over her 6-month pregnant belly. Julian sat 2 rows behind her, a silent, solid presence. Damien sat at the opposing table, flanked by a team of 3 lawyers. He looked impeccable in a sharp, dark suit, his face a stone mask. He refused to look at Eleanor, his gaze fixed on the judge's empty bench. He radiated an aura of immense, unbreakable power. The hearing began, and Damien's lead counsel, a wily, silver-haired man named Victor Grant, went on the attack. He painted a picture of Eleanor's life as one of instability, citing her move to a less safe neighborhood and her unseemly relationship with a man known to have a vendetta against Mr. Cross. He was weaving a fiction of recklessness, and with every word, Eleanor felt her reality slipping away. Then Laura Scott stood to speak. "Your Honor," she began, her voice calm and clear, "we are not here today about my client's instability. We are here about Mr. Cross's obsession." Laura systematically dismantled his case. She presented Eleanor's rental agreement, her prenatal records, glowing letters of recommendation from the library board. She presented a detailed report from a child psychologist who had evaluated Eleanor and found her to be remarkably resilient and eminently prepared for motherhood. Then she played her trump card. "Your Honor, the petitioner claims my client's association with Mr. Julian Rhodes is a source of instability. I would argue that it is Mr. Cross's reaction to this friendship that is the real cause for concern." She turned to Damien's table. "Mr. Grant, is your client aware that his companion, Ms. Isabelle Dubois, visited my client's home 2 days ago?" A flash of surprise in Damien's eyes. He shot a look at Isabelle, who sat in the front row, suddenly pale. "And is he aware?" Laura continued, her voice rising. "That Ms. Dubois threatened my client? We have a sworn affidavit from a witness." Grant objected, but the judge, her curiosity now fully engaged, allowed it. The atmosphere in this courtroom shifted. The first crack appeared in Damien's monolithic facade. But Julian knew this wasn't enough. Damien could dismiss Isabelle's actions as those of a jealous woman. Julian had to detonate the truth. During a brief recess, he approached Laura and Eleanor, his face grim. He held a thin file. "There's something you both need to see," he said. "It explains everything." He laid out his investigator's findings. Isabelle Dubois had been born Vera Kozlov. Her father, a small-time contractor in Brooklyn, had been driven into bankruptcy and despair a decade earlier, after his company was deliberately crushed in a hostile acquisition. The man who orchestrated that takeover, who saw a small competitor and decided to snuff it out for sport, was a young, ruthlessly ambitious Damien Cross. Vera's father had taken his own life 6 months later. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a long-term revenge plot. "She didn't meet Damien at a gala," Julian explained, his voice low and urgent. "She targeted him. She studied him. She spent 2 years maneuvering her way into his orbit. She learned his weaknesses, his ego, his rivalry with me. She probably fed him lies about you, Eleanor, fanning the flames of his insecurity to push him into her arms. This was never love. It was revenge. She wanted to become his wife, secure her future, and then destroy him from within, just as he destroyed her family. The pieces fit with a nauseating clarity. Isabelle's bizarre accusations, her desperation, her intimate knowledge of how to manipulate Damien's ego. Damien, returning to the courtroom, saw the three of them huddled together. He saw the file in Julian's hand, and a cold dread, an emotion he hadn't felt since childhood, began to seep into his bones. When the hearing resumed, Laura Scott requested permission to call a surprise witness to the stand. Isabelle Dubois. Panic flared in Isabelle's eyes. She tried to refuse, but the judge, her curiosity now fully engaged, compelled her. On the stand, under Laura's sharp questioning, Isabelle's composure crumbled. The lies unraveled. When Laura presented a copy of her father's bankruptcy filing, with Damien's signature on the takeover papers, Isabel completely broke. "He deserved it," she sobbed, the words pouring out of her, raw and laced with a decade of hatred. She looked directly at Damien, her face a mess of tears and streaked mascara. "He took everything from us. I was going to take everything from you, Damien, your company, your name, your child. I was going to make you feel what it was like to have nothing." A collective gasp swept the courtroom. Every camera, every eye turned to Damien. His mask didn't just crack, it shattered. The revelation was a catastrophic blow. He looked at Isabel, this woman he had chosen, and saw not a prize, but a viper he had willingly led into his bed. He saw the last year of his life not as a series of choices he had made, but as a script written by the vengeful daughter of a man he barely remembered ruining. His betrayal of Eleanor wasn't even his own idea. It was a symptom of his own vanity, expertly manipulated. The power he treasured, the control he wielded with such arrogance, was an illusion. He had been a puppet. He looked at Eleanor, truly looked at her for the first time in a year. He saw the woman he had loved, the quiet strength he had cruelly misjudged, the life they were supposed to have. He saw the swell of her belly, holding a child born of a love he had murdered. And he saw her sitting next to Julian Rhodes, a man who had shown her the respect and kindness of which he had been incapable. The judge's voice was a distant hum. The lawyer's words were meaningless noise. The entire foundation of Damien's identity, the master of the universe, the man in control, had been pulverized. He had lost everything. Not his money, not his company, but the one thing he now realized was priceless: a genuine human connection. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He didn't say a word. He simply turned and walked out of the courtroom, his shoulders, for the first time in his life, hunched in defeat. He pushed his way through the crowd of reporters, his face a ghostly white. He had walked into the courtroom a king demanding his property. He walked out a hollowed-out man, haunted by the ruins of a life he himself, and so foolishly, had destroyed. The moment of truth had come not from a rival or a market crash, but from the ghosts of his own cruelty. A new life. The fallout from the hearing was a silent implosion. The case was dismissed, Damien's petitions withdrawn with a terse, one-line email from a junior lawyer at his firm. The story, however, exploded. The tale of the cold millionaire, his vengeful mistress, and the resilient wife became the talk of New York. But for once, the narrative centered not on Damien's power or Isabel's deception, but on Eleanor's quiet dignity. Damien disappeared from public view. He retreated to his silent penthouse. But the silence was different now. It was no longer a symbol of his control, but a reflection of his emptiness. Isabel was gone. Her name and face vanished as quickly as they had appeared, leaving only the wreckage of her long, simmering revenge. Damien was left alone, with the wreckage of his life. He didn't fight the divorce. The papers were signed without objection. He gave everything Eleanor and Laura asked for: full legal and physical custody of the baby to Eleanor, a generous and unconditional child support trust, and the formal transfer of a significant portion of his liquid assets to her. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a penance. 3 months later, Eleanor gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Phoenix, but nicknamed him Leo. He had her warm brown eyes and a stubborn tuft of dark hair. Holding him in her arms in the quiet hospital room, Eleanor felt a sense of peace so profound it felt sacred. The war was over. Her new life had begun. Julian was there. He had been there for the last few months of her pregnancy, a quiet, steady source of strength and love. He held Leo with a tenderness that made Eleanor's heart ache with a fierce, protective joy. Their love story hadn't been forged in ballroom and candlelit dinners, but in the trenches of a bitter legal war and the shared project of rebuilding a life. It was stronger for it. 6 months after Leo's birth, Eleanor received an unexpected email. It was from Damien. It was short, stripped of his usual corporate jargon, and shockingly direct. Eleanor, I know there are no words that can undo the damage I have done. I was a fool, blinded by an arrogance I mistook for strength. I betrayed you, and I betrayed our son before he was born. I expect nothing from you, not forgiveness, not a second chance. But I would like to be a father to Leo, not a provider, not a name on a trust, but a father. I have started therapy. I am trying to understand the man I became and to become a better one. If you are ever willing to allow it, I would like to meet him. The terms would be entirely yours. Damien. Eleanor read the email several times. The old Damien would have sent a demand through his lawyers. This message was different. It was stripped of ego. It was the sound of a man who had finally hit rock bottom and was beginning the slow, painful climb back. She talked it over with Julian. His response is, as always, measured and supportive. Leo deserves a father, he said. If Damien is truly willing to do the work to be a good one, that's a gift to your son. But the choice is yours, Eleanor. You are in control now. She agreed to a meeting at a public park on a cool autumn afternoon. Damien looked different. He had lost weight. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a hesitant uncertainty. He didn't try to touch Leo at first. He just looked at him, his eyes filled with a universe of regret. That was the beginning of Damien's redemption. It wasn't a grand cinematic arc. It was a slow, painful, and private process. It was awkward, supervised park visits. It was him learning how to hold his son, how to change a diaper, how to exist in a room without trying to dominate it. He sold the penthouse, moved to a smaller, more human-scaled apartment. He stepped down as CEO of Cross Holdings, taking on a less public board role. It was dismantling the monument he had built to his own ego, stone by stone. He never got Eleanor back. He never tried. He saw the easy, genuine love between her and Julian. He saw the stable, happy home they were building for Leo. He understood, with a clarity that was both painful and liberating, that he had forfeited his right to that life. His redemption wasn't about reclaiming what he had lost, but about honoring it from a distance. It was about becoming a man worthy of being Leo's father. 2 years later, Eleanor, Julian, and a giggling, babbling Leo were feeding ducks at the pond in Central Park. It was a perfect Sunday. Eleanor, now a sought-after art consultant with her own successful small firm, felt a sense of contentment so profound it felt sacred. Across the pond, partially hidden by a weeping willow, Damien watched them. He wasn't spying. He was simply observing. He saw his son, happy and loved. He saw the woman he had discarded, radiant and thriving. A sharp pang of his colossal loss hit him, as it always did. But this time, it was followed by something else. A quiet sense of gratitude. Gratitude that they were well. Gratitude that despite his best efforts to destroy her, this beautiful life existed. He gave a small, sad, accepting smile. He had been a cold millionaire who had lost everything. But in losing, he had found a flicker of his humanity. It wasn't the ending he would have chosen, but it was the one he had earned. He turned and walked away, not a titan of industry, but just a man who finally understood the true measure of wealth And so Damien Cross learned the hardest lesson of all. You cannot put a price on a human heart. Eleanor's journey from the depths of betrayal to a life filled with authentic love and purpose is a powerful reminder that our greatest strength is often forged in our deepest pain. This wasn't just a story about a rich man's fall. It was about a woman's incredible rise. It shows that true power is not about control or wealth, but about resilience, forgiveness, and the courage to build a new life from the ashes of the old. If this story of heartbreak, resilience, and redemption moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who appreciates a story with true emotional depth. And for more captivating dramas and stories that explore the complexities of the human heart, be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell.